Oh my goodness. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello. Is it working? Is this hair situation acceptable? Oh my God, what's going on? I'm so thrilled to be here with you guys. It's been a minute since I've gone live in this group, and by a minute, I mean like, I don't know, what has it been? 6 months, something like that. So I am so thrilled to be with you today. It always drives me crazy when people do like a ton of vamping at the beginning of a live because I know some of you are watching this later after the like on the replay. So I'm going to try to do less vamping and just get into the conversation. I will warn you that today in my house, usually it's just my husband and me and our crazy rambunctious dog in our little house. But this week I have my mother and her little dog in the house. So if there's like loud banging or people shouting or something like that, because my husband loves to have loud phone conversations, I may need to take a little pause and deal with that. But we're gonna just delve right into it. Hi Nancy, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining this live today. So today actually, you know what? Let me just check and make sure that you guys can hear me okay. Let's hear anybody that's watching, if you can just give me a thumbs up or a little note in the comments letting me know that you can hear me. I'm not going to wait for that, but if you could give me one, then I will be really super happy. So today I wanted to give you guys a kind of an overview of a practice that has been extremely transformative for me in terms of, I'm just going to use the classic phrases in terms of healing my relationship with food. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, so the name of this practice is intuitive eating. I'm going to explain to you guys what that is. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my journey with that practice. Hi, Jillian. So great to have you here. And I'm going to walk you through the 10 principles that are the foundation of the philosophy of intuitive eating. And from here on in, I'm going to refer to intuitive eating as IE just because it's kind of a mouthful for me. Okay? So when I say IE, that's what I mean. So let me just get into it here. Okay, so here's a quick overview of what intuitive eating is. Okay, my friends. So first of all, intuitive eating, capital I, capital E, is different than open quote, eating intuitively, lowercase e, lowercase I. This is a situation where I feel this is a distinction that's really important to make because intuitive eating, capital I, capital E, is a very specific set of practices that are intrinsically it's an attitude or a philosophy toward food that is intrinsically anti-diet. And I say that because I can't tell you the number of times that I've had this thing happen where I'll be usually like when I'm interacting with people about this, it's on Facebook in a Facebook group or what have you. But oftentimes people will tell you all about their diet or all the things that they're doing to lose weight. And then they'll say that they're eating intuitively, lowercase e, lowercase I. And I just really want to start by making the distinction here between this specific set of practices that was invented by a couple of nutritionists who wrote a book about it in the 90s, this very specific set of anti-dieting, heal your relationship with food type practices that are different than just kind of some sort of nebulous idea that any individual rando on the internet might have about what intuitive eating actually is. Okay, so this is a very specific thing. So here are the things I want you to know about intuitive eating, the practice, i.e. the practice, this specific particular approach to food. First of all, it was developed by two nutritionists whose names are Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch, who published a seminal book about it in 1995. The other thing I want you to know about IE as a practice is that it's very strongly supported by a ton of research as a health supporting approach to food. And I'm going to present some of the basic research about it in just a minute. And I think it's important to clarify also that there is such a difference. Hey, Lisa, no problem. You'll catch it later. Um, there's such a huge difference between uh, a scientific hypothesis that is supported by, for example, one intriguing study versus a scientific hypothesis that is supported by an enormous body of research, right? There's a difference between those two things, and I want to make it clear that IE is supported by an enormous body of research as an approach to eating and food that makes you healthier in your body, and that certainly makes you more healthy emotionally. Okay, so that's another thing I want you to know. It's made up of 10 principles, which we'll get to in just a minute. And again, as I said at the beginning, intuitive eating is a specific philosophy with specific principles, specific elements that have been supported by an ever-growing body of research. So again, it's not the same as just kind of saying, oh yeah, I'm dieting or I'm doing intermittent fasting, but I'm eating intuitively. I cut sugar, but I'm eating intuitively. It's like those types of practices, intermittent fasting, etc. You might have it in your head. You might have an idea in your head rationally that intermittent fasting is not a diet. But if you are changing anything about the way that you eat with the intention to lose weight, that is a diet. That's the premise that the philosophy of intuitive eating takes, and it's supported by a ton of research about what actually happens in your body when the way that you treat your body communicates to your body that it cannot reliably get food when it wants it. My God, I'm getting like emotional about that. It's like it's so freaking sad, right? When the messages that your body is receiving are that it cannot trust you to give it what it wants when it asks for it, right? That's the big thing that IE is really pushing back against, is this practice that is supported by diet culture, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, that where your body gives you a message and you either are incapable of receiving it because your receiver has been so compromised by diet culture, basically, or you receive the message that you're hungry, but you don't pick up the phone. It's like the phone rings, you don't pick up the phone. You're not responsive to it. So that's an overview of what IE is. And I just want to start here a little bit with, I also want to just acknowledge here at the very beginning, I want to do a privilege check about myself. So I am bigger now than I used to be. I'm fatter now than I used to be. And also, to be clear here at the beginning, I do not use the word fat, the adjective fat, as a pejorative one. So, and this is because of what I've learned about what many people in the fat activist community prefer in terms of how they refer to themselves. They refer to themselves as fat. They don't, like, part of what their work is trying to transform the culture where fat is not a bad thing to be. It's not a bad way to refer to somebody, right? So when I say this, it's not like I'm not dissing myself by saying this. I'm fatter now than I used to be, but I'm still what's called in the fat liberation movement straight-sized, and I have been all my life. This gives me what's called thin privilege, right? I think you probably can infer what that means based on context clues, but I'm just going to spell it out for you, what thin privilege actually means for me as a straight-sized person. And straight-sized means the sizes that you could buy in clothing at like a clothing store, right? Because to talk about some of the privileges that come with being thin, one of the things about being thin is that generally if you're under size 18, you can usually find clothing that fits you in a clothing store, right? In your average store that you might go to in the mall in the before times, right? One of the ways that our culture does not treat people of size or fat people respectfully is that it's very hard to find clothing sizes above what are called straight sizes, right? So above like 18, anything above like 18 or 20, those are hard clothes to find in stores. Another thing is that seats fit me on an airplane, in restaurants. If I go to the doctor, the waiting room chairs will usually fit me. I don't need to consult a maximum weight chart when I buy furniture. Clothing is easier for me to find. When I go to the doctor, they're willing to talk to me about my actual problem. They don't fob me off by saying that I need to lose weight and don't actually address my problem. I'm not discriminated against at my job for my weight. There's never been an epidemic named after some feature of my anatomy as a thin person, whereas for people of size or fat people, there's like our culture, our fat phobic culture has created this concept called the obesity epidemic, and then our culture has basically labeled fat people with this, right? And then I was never teased in school. The number one reason why children get bullied in school is for weight. It's very, very sad. So if what I say about this intuitive eating practice and about fat phobia in our culture, if that speaks to you, please know that I learned all this stuff from fat activists, from fat positive activists. And I strongly suggest that you support your work and that you go find them. So here are some names. Sonia Renee Taylor, whose work I've spoken about in this group before. She's an amazing fat positive and anti-racist activist. A woman named Ashley Lindleen. I read her work a lot. Reagan Chastain, who is a titan in the fat activism world. She's a wonderful writer and thinker. In the movement world, two people that I know about are Diane Bondi and Amber Carnes. I follow their work. They're amazing. And then more recently, I really have been enjoying the work of fat activist Aubrey Gordon, who recently started a great podcast called Maintenance Phase. Like if you're actively working on shifting your attitudes about fat phobia so that you can treat yourself better and spend less time obsessing about the way that you look and about your fatness and more time on actually doing cool shit in your life, I strongly suggest you start to listen to this podcast. Again, it's called Maintenance Phase, and it's founded by this woman named Aubrey Gordon, and her co-host is a guy named Michael Hobbs, who wrote an amazing article for the Huffington Post, the title of which is Why Everything We Think We Know About Obesity is Wrong. And he's actually one of the sources for this conversation that we're having today. Some of the data that I present here today is going to be based on the work of Michael Hobbs. And then a lot of the work that I'm presenting here today is based on this amazing book that was written by Evelyn Tribole. I'm like, let me move this so I can actually see myself on camera. Yes, there it is. There I am. There's the book. A lot of the information that I'm going to present today comes from this book, which is called Intuitive Eating: Revolutionary Anti-Diet Approach by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. So this is also an amazing book. So when you hear me give some quotes today, it's mainly from that book. Okay, good times. So that's the privilege check part. That's where I acknowledge, and I also should acknowledge, I'm also privileged in that I'm a white cis heterosexual woman raised in a middle-class environment. So those are also forms of privilege that I have. I do have some hidden disabilities in that I'm not neurotypical, but generally I'm an enormously privileged person. So I just want to acknowledge that here at the outset. And then another one of my privileges that I think it's important to acknowledge as I sort of like host this conversation about this topic is that I've never had an eating disorder per se. Health in general is a privilege, and not having had an eating disorder is a privilege. So I just want to acknowledge all that stuff here at the outset. Okay? All right. My journey. So I, as I said before, I never had an eating disorder, and in fact, I have never been a big dieter. Like I have actually been on one thing that looked like a diet in my life. And it went, it went horribly badly. It was I don't even think it was successful. I don't think I lost a single pound, and I felt like shit the entire time, and maybe it lasted like a month. But I have had what I now have come to understand were orthorexic eating patterns for a lot of my adult life. So I grew up in a house with a lot of diet talk. So even though I myself was never on a diet, I grew up in a house where diets were talked about frequently, and fatness was definitely identified as something that was problematic. And you didn't want to, you did not like in my household when I was a kid, the attitude was that you didn't want to be fat. That a diet was a good thing, losing weight was a good thing, and I don't want to share specifics of those times because my family is still around and on the internet, thank God. And I'm not interested in, like, I don't know, shaming them or telling their stories, but I feel that I can share about my stories that I grew up in a house where there was a lot of diet talk. So even though I was relatively thin, in fact, a frequent topic at my house, one of the messages that I got when I was a kid was that because I was on the smaller side, my smaller size was frequently positively compared to other people in my house in all kinds of ways. So one effect of that was that I never felt like I had to diet for years and years because I was more or less the same size. I was toward the smaller end of straight sizes. But one of the effects of the fact that I grew up in a house with all of this diet talk and all of this anti-fat talk is that then when I crossed 40 and my metabolism changed and my hormones changed, or God only knows what happened, right? Pandemic, bodies are mysterious. When I got bigger, when I got fatter, when I gained weight, well, I don't even know, but I wouldn't even say gained weight. When my appearance looked fatter, right? I felt lousy about myself because even if you are a thin person, being in an environment where dieting is talked up and fatness is denigrated, even if you're a thin person, then what happens when your body changes, right? So this is the thing, not to knock mothers or parents, because I know parents, God knows, are working their asses off all the time just to try to be the best parents they can be without a lot of support from the wider culture. Um, but I just do think it's important to point out that um, when you are heavily invested in dieting and when you are fat phobic and you talk about it a lot, the the kids, the people that you are around, including your children, including our children, right? Because I'm around kids a fair amount, even though I don't have kids. If you're heavily invested in that and you're talking about it a lot in front of kids, they absorb that shit. And even if they are in um, a, a slim 8-year-old body, those messages come back to them over the course of their lives, right? And impact the way that they feel about themselves as their bodies changed. So so when I was younger, I never really worried about my weight or had a diet or had a dieting history, but I still internalized a lot of messages about my value as a thin person. Even though I didn't diet, I did acquire over the years a lot of behaviors around food that I have come to regard as what's called orthorexic. And orthorexia is a term that actually Kelly Landrigan in this group reminded me of that term. Orthorexia is a word that has the same root as the word orthodox, and basically it's having a lot of rigid food rules. It's an eating disorder, or in its more milder form, right? It's a form of disordered eating that is focused on quality, not quantity. So I was born in the 70s and I came of age in sort of like the 90s. And at that time, I was living in New York in that time, and I just felt like there were all these messages around about food, like all the time. And as I said, I'd grown up in this household where there was a ton of diet talk, and correspondingly, there was a ton of diet talk in my house as a kid, and there was also partially influenced, I think, by the feeling of deprivation that diet culture creates. There was also in my house just a great love of food. I think in a healthy way, in some ways that were really healthy, and some ways that were like not so healthy, in the sense that like because one of the things that happens is when you have this deprivation mentality, um, you're more likely to binge, right? So in my house, there was a great love of food. Like that was one of the big important things for my family. My parents were both really good cooks, and on the holidays, we had very particular things that we did with food. Um, yeah, I don't remember how I got started down this road, but this is the truth about my upbringing, right? So let me get back on track. Um, but then in the 90s, when I was in my 20s, vegetarianism was hot, so I did that for a while. I flirted with that for a while. I had a stint of going gluten free, and I really felt like that made me feel better. And then from being gluten free, I graduated to the paleo diet. Graduated is kind of sounds like a positive term. I don't know that it was necessarily a positive for me. Really, I'm not sure about that. And the paleo diet is that the way that that works is that you avoid grains. And again, I wasn't doing it necessarily to lose weight. The reason why I was avoiding grains is because I actually think that what was happening is that I have pretty sensitive blood sugar. And I actually think that what was happening was that when I ate, I don't know, a sandwich on white bread without a lot of protein or vegetables, it made my blood sugar crash. But so I started with gluten free, I went to paleo, and then from there I pursued an even more restrictive version of the paleo diet called the sugar detox, which allowed no grains and very few carbs, where you couldn't even really eat fruit other than green apples. So I graduated to that. And I did see some health improvements from this, and an allergic condition I had partially cleared up, but it didn't clear up all the way. And the thing is, it was a lot of freaking work, and it was an enormous pain in the ass to keep all this up. But I kept it up. I kept it up through my 20s and a lot of my 30s. And it got progressively more and more restrictive over time, right? Then what happened was, when I turned 40, I went on a trip to India, and when I got back from that trip, I was kind of sick. I had like the usual digestive problems that everybody has. When I got back from that trip, um, I was sick for 6 weeks, just like not seriously sick, just sort of like I had a weird cold, and I had a lot of digestive symptoms and what have you. And after that, I found that I was able to eat everything that before I had thought that I had an intolerance to. I could eat eggs, I could eat gluten, I could eat anything I wanted to. So that's what I did. When I got back from that trip, I ate whatever the fuck I wanted because I could. And I got into a big baking stint, the results of which you can see on my Instagram. Actually, for a couple of years, I was this very dedicated baker. So I baked cookies, I baked elaborate cakes, I baked bread, I baked all this stuff because I could eat gluten again. And the deprivation of all those years, probably 15 years where I was trying to avoid gluten, the deprivation of all those years, I had a lot to make up for. And so I really started this practice of eating whatever I wanted to eat. And then what happened was I gained weight. And I turned 40, and my hormones changed or what have you. So, and I had always had this identity as a thin person. So I tried to go on a diet, and I freaking hated it. I hated dieting. I had never dieted before, and it was a nightmare. I hated measuring out everything. I hated the way that if you made a meal at home, you had to try to parse out, you had to like enter the ingredients of the recipe into a calorie counter online and try to figure it out. I hated the way that the world of dieting is an entree into a far more destructive world of focusing on what is wrong with your body. I'm going to say that again. I hated the way, I mean, at that point, I'd been a yoga teacher for a long time. So I had very much honed this ethos of like loving my body. And I definitely felt like when I started like downloading dieting apps and kind of paying more attention to things that would help me lose weight, that became this gateway, this portal into this horrible world of determining the way your value based on the way that you look. Like I really did not care for it, and I didn't like the person I was when I was doing it. I didn't like the relationship. This is a big thing. I didn't like the relationship that I had with myself when I was dieting. I also found that it didn't really work that well for me. I know people who have had enormous success with dieting, success in the short term. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Um, I never freaking had that. Like I had to work my ass off to lose like a pound. I don't know why, but it didn't really work for me that well. In fact, a very common pattern in dieting actually is this thing where the first diet you go on, oftentimes because it's the first time and your metabolism hasn't acclimated to it yet, the first time you go on a diet, it's common to lose more weight. And then subsequently, see what happens is when you go on a diet, your body thinks it's starving and it makes all these accommodations to keep fat on. So every time you diet, you reset your body's set point. This is a little bit more complex than I wanted to get into with this, but your set point is like your body's opinion about what it should weigh or how fat it wants to be, how fat or thin it wants to be, right? And when you go on a diet, your body doesn't really know the difference between dieting and starving. And so your body makes all of these metabolic adjustments, so that oftentimes the first time you go on a diet, it's really successful, or you lose weight, right? It's successful in the sense that you lose weight. I would argue that it's not successful in the sense that you are dissociating yourself more and more from the cues that your body is trying to give you about hunger and satiety. And then subsequently on each diet you go on after that, you're chasing the dragon. You're like trying your best. You're like pursuing the illusion of, oh, here's Kelly. Hey, Kelly. Oh, I'm glad you're listening. I gave you a shout out just a minute before, Kelly. You're always trying to chase the dragon of that weight loss that you had at the beginning, right? Okay, so that's how I discovered it. Let's see if I have anything else to say about that. Oh yeah. Okay, so I really felt that dieting was not for me. So then it was like, well, what was I going to do about the fact that I was fatter than I was before, and I felt horrible about it, right? Because all my identity was wrapped up in being thin, because that's who I'd been as a kid in my household. So I discovered the fat positive hashtag, and from there I started diversifying my socials in terms of the types of bodies that I was seeing, and in terms of I basically had this enormous awakening around fat phobia in our culture, which I'd always been kind of dimly aware of, but of course I was aware of it in a heightened way because I was fighting these demons inside myself, right? About like, oh my God, I'm in a bigger body now. My identity before was as a thin person. Do I have value? Can I like the way that I look? Now that I'm fatter, right? I was struggling with all that stuff. So it was a really healing and important time for me in terms of discovering the fat positive hashtag, following these fat activists. And those activists were my gateway into a totally different kind of world, right? Like I talked before about going on a diet was this portal into this horrible world that I hated, this mindset that was all about evaluating yourself based on how you looked and measuring everything, and not actually really listening to the messages that you're getting on the inside from your body. Whereas fat activism and fat positivity became this amazing portal for me into greater awareness of the force of fat phobia in our culture, being aware that diet culture was a thing, working on practices of self-love, right? So I was introduced to IE through the lens of fat activism, for which I am profoundly grateful, because I got to begin dismantling my own fat phobia as I learned more about IE. Okay. So let's talk about the benefits of IE, okay? So this is just so you know. Intuitive eaters have lower disordered eating, lower triglycerides, lower emotional eating, lower self-silencing, which is suppressing your thoughts, feelings, and needs. They have lower occurrences of loss of control eating, lower weight bias internalization, lower blood pressure, lower binging, lower body dissatisfaction. And again, I'm saying this stuff, this is based on an enormous body of research that's been done about this practice. Intuitive eaters have higher self-esteem, well-being, and optimism. There's a high intuitive eaters tend to have a higher variety of foods that they eat, a higher degree of body appreciation and acceptance, higher HDL, which is the good cholesterol, higher interoceptive awareness, higher pleasure from food, better proactive coping, higher psychological hardiness, higher unconditional self-regard, higher motivation to exercise when the focus is on enjoyment rather than guilt or appearance. And again, these are the benefits of intuitive eating that have been proven, that have been investigated and proven by this enormous body of research in a bunch of different labs, by a bunch of different people, a bunch of different scientists. So there's a couple of things I want you to understand here about food, a couple of assumptions that I want to challenge right at the outset before I get into the 10 key principles of what that are the heart of the IE practice. There's a couple of key things that I want you to understand. The first one is that diets don't fucking work. Diets don't fucking work, man. Yeah. Diets don't fucking work. So you may hear that and you may think like, what are you talking about? Diets work great. I've dieted and lost weight. I have this friend that's dieted and lost weight. You see it all over the news. People go on diets and they don't work. So again, I just want to be clear that the studies and the research that I present to you in this, none of this is the result, none of these conclusions that I'm presenting to you are the result of like a single intriguing study showed that maybe the blah, blah, blah. These studies that I'm going to talk about are meta studies. These are the results of enormous of studies that are large and that have been aggregated together. So it's an enormous body of research that shows this shit. So if this is news to you, I'm sorry. This might blow your mind and it might be very, I don't know, painful to hear. I think if you've invested many years in dieting, this information that I'm about to share with you might be really distressing, but you know, let's get out of the fucking diet culture matrix, my friends. Long-term studies show that 1/3 to 2/3 of weight loss is regained within 1 year, and almost all is regained within 5 years. So yeah, dieting might work in the short term, but the weight comes back. The weight comes back. Listen to this though. This next part is the real kicker. So at least 1/3, and probably more like 2/3 of dieters regain more weight than they lost, right? In other words, dieting to lose weight, right, intentional weight loss, is literally associated by an enormous body of research that proves this over decades. Doctors and scientists have known this for decades. Dieting to lose weight is literally associated with future weight gain. As it turns out, dieting is lousy at making you thinner. Okay, so if your goal is to look thinner, which is often the desire lurking behind, I just want to get healthy, right? Dieting works against you. I just want to make clear again that I do not think being fat is a bad thing, right? I'm not saying this because it's my way of trying to undercut fat people, right? I'm just saying that if your goal is to be thin, dieting is not going to get you there, right? The weight comes back, and oftentimes, not only does the weight come back to bring you back to the point where you started, you will actually, it's more likely, at least 1/3 and probably more like 2/3 is what the studies show, of dieters regain more weight than they lost. Dieting to lose weight is literally associated with future weight gain. As it turns out, dieting is lousy at making you thinner. What dieting is really good at is this, aligning you with the values and imperatives of a fat-phobic culture. Right? What dieting is really good at is making you hate yourself. Sadly. Yeah. I'm just checking the comments. Yeah, Kelly says it's such a sham too. All the expert diet book author has to do is make those first couple of millions and they're done. Yeah, it's really tragic. And diet culture, like becoming aware of diet culture, it's just so suddenly you see it everywhere. It's like the glasses come off and suddenly you're like, "Oh my God." Like once you know this fact that diets don't work, um, it's just it's just mind-blowing to see how invested our culture is in this practice that is not even necessarily that is not even effective at what it purports to be effective at, which is losing weight, and is so damaging to health. Like that's a whole other Facebook Live that I could do about how weight cycling or practices where your weight goes up and down, weight cycling is extremely detrimental to your health. And there's a lot of work that's been done around the idea. There's a lot of research that's been done that shows that many of the negative health outcomes that people associate with obesity are actually more the result of weight cycling and the result of being a fat person living in a fat phobic society. Which brings me to my next point. So the two key things I want you to know are that diets don't work. And the second thing is being fat won't kill you. Being fat won't kill you. In fact, in some situations, it even acts in your favor. Yeah. So let me talk a little bit more about being fat won't kill you. So this is a quote from this article that Michael Hobbs wrote about what we don't know about obesity. Okay. Kind of long, but I'll break it down to you. I'll break it down for you. Weight and health are not perfect synonyms. Yes, it's true that nearly every population level study finds that fat people have worse cardiovascular health than thin people. But individuals are not averages. Studies have found that anywhere from 1/3 to 3/4 of people classified as obese are metabolically healthy. They show no signs of elevated blood pressure, insulin resistance, or high cholesterol. Meanwhile, about 1/4 of non-overweight people are what epidemiologists call the lean unhealthy. A 2016 study that followed participants for an average of 19 years found that unfit thin people were twice as likely to get diabetes as fit fat people. Let me say that again. Unfit skinny people were twice as likely to get diabetes as fit fat people. Habits, no matter what your size, are really what matter. Dozens of indicators from vegetable consumption to regular exercise to grip strength provide a better snapshot of someone's health than looking at her from across a room. So that's Michael Hobbs. And then I'll just add here, many obesity studies fail to take into account the confounding factor of fat phobia in society. The way we treat fat people in our culture is profoundly harmful. Okay, so those are two things I want you to know. Diets don't work, and being fat won't kill you. Okay. I just want to say one other thing here. I meant to put a slide in here and I forgot. This is already getting really long, so I want to not, like, I have a lot to say about this topic. There's a number of political factors for why our attitudes about obesity, our negative attitudes about obesity got ratcheted up in the aughts. One of which is that, well, I won't get into it too much, but I just want you to know that politics plays a big role in our attitudes about obesity, about why we think it's such a horrible thing. Okay, so before we get into the 10 principles, there's one more key concept that I want to introduce to you, and that's the concept of interoception. Interoception is your ability to perceive the signals that your body is sending you. Interoception is the part of you that tells you when you have things like a full bladder, when you need to defecate. Interoception tells you when you're tired. It tells you when you're hungry. It tells you when you're satiated. Interoception is also the felt sense of any emotion that you have. IE is a personal process of honoring health by listening and responding to the direct messages of the body in order to get your needs met. Okay? The principles of IE work either by enhancing interoceptive awareness or by removing the obstacles of perceiving and responding to the felt sensations in the body. Right? So the way that intuitive eating works is through interoception. Interoception is your body's ability to perceive what's going on inside it, to perceive its own needs, right? And this body awareness, interoception, is only one part of the process. The other part is interoceptive receptiveness, which is to say, can you perceive the messages that your body is sending to you? And then do you respond to them, right? When your body is like, listen, I got to drop a deuce. When your body is like, listen, I have to pee. Do you go to the bathroom? When your body is tired, when your body's like, I'm tired, do you go to sleep, right? Do you let yourself sleep? Something just popped up in the comments. Yeah, let's see here. Oh yeah, Kelly's talking about all these people that made a lot of money selling diet books, right? Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew what interoception was before I started this, because interoception is really the superpower that allows intuitive, that is like your ability to connect with your interoception is the heart of the IE practice, okay? So the 10 principles of IE, I'll talk about them now. They can be applied in any order. You don't have to do number 1 first and then do number 2 and work through them like that, right? You can do them in any order that you want, which I think is important to say at the outset. But here's the first one, okay? The first principle of IE is you want to reject the diet mentality. You want to know that dieting fails for 95% of people and work on eliminating the media in your life or the influences in your life that promise you the false hope of losing weight quickly, easily, and or permanently. Right? So the first principle is you want to start actively, purposefully pushing back against those pro-dieting forces in your life. And Evelyn Tribole talks about how when she and Elise Resch first came up with the intuitive eating framework, this clear, specific, active rejection of dieting was not actually a part of the framework. And they're like nice white ladies, right? They didn't want to rock the boat. They didn't want to push back too hard against things. They didn't want to make people uncomfortable. But what they found was that diet culture is so fucking pervasive and so toxic and so deeply entrenched in our culture that they had to make the active rejection of diet culture one of the principles of IE. So they suggest that it's probably even good for you to get angry at the many oppressive forces in our culture that have made you blame yourself for your failure at intentional weight loss. You're not a failure. Dieting is a system or a practice that is virtually impossible to succeed at because of the way that human beings are metabolically wired and evolved to relate to the act of eating. Okay, so number 1, reject the diet mentality. Principle number 2, honor your hunger. My loves, you need to fucking eat. You need to fucking eat. When you're hungry, you need to eat. She says, learning to honor this first biological signal sets the stage for rebuilding trust in yourself and in food. If you don't eat when you're hungry, you trigger primal mechanisms in your body and your brain and your metabolism to overeat, right? So principle number 2 is honor your hunger. When you're hungry, eat. When you're hungry, eat. This also, it's so important, guys, in terms of, it's so important, my friends, in terms of learning, teaching your body that it can trust you, that it can trust the environment that it's in, teaching your body that it's going to get its needs met, because there is this is so important to understand. You have your rational thoughts at the top of your head. Well, they're not necessarily rational, right? But you have all your thoughts at the top of your head, your conscious stuff, the stuff that you're aware of about yourself, right? The things you're actively thinking. Right now, I'm thinking about my shopping list, or I'm thinking about that person I don't like at work, right? But there are all these other levels of who you are as a person, right? There are all of these other levels of the organism that is you. And those levels do not have the same fucking concerns as the part of you that looks at that Instagram influencer in her bathing suit and feels crappy about your cellulite, right? In a deep way, your body's like, am I going to get enough to eat? Am I going to get to go to the bathroom when I need to? Am I going to get to move? Am I going to get sunshine? If I'm thirsty, does water come in? Do I feel held in my environment? Do I feel that there are people around me that care about me? Movement, rest. Am I going to get enough rest? Right? Your body, like the organism of your body, doesn't give a shit about Instagram. Or whatever it is, right? Like this goes back to the first principle, which is rejecting the diet mentality. Your body is an organism that wants to be fed and watered and moved and cuddled, and it wants to have sex, maybe. It wants to feel itself a part of a wider world, right? Your body is an organism that has needs, and if you don't give it, if you don't respond to what it's asking for at a very deep level, your body is like, oh, I can't trust the environment I'm in. I don't know, I'm gonna send the signal out, hey, we're hungry, and nothing happens. No fuel comes in. At a very deep level, your body realizes that it can't trust the environment that it's in. It's fucking sad. It's really sad. It makes me sad for our bodies. Like, you would never do that to your dog. Sadly, well, actually, the thing that's really sad and crazy, I'm trying not to use the word crazy so much, because it's an ableist term, right? The thing that's really sad and irrational in the sense that it is literally working against the interests of people and beings that you care about is that diet culture will make people do shit like put their 7-year-old on a diet. Or, I mean, it's different with pets, I think, but like, I have definitely had, like, people comment on pets' weights all the time. Like, do you notice this? People are constantly talking about, oh, that dog looks skinny, that dog gained weight, like, there's so much of an emphasis on that. Anyway, back to the principles. Okay, honor your hunger is number 2. Number 3, make peace with food. Make peace with food. Give yourself unconditional permission to eat. Unconditional permission to eat. That is a very profound one, my friends. Unconditional permission to eat what you want. To eat what you want. Depriving yourself builds into uncontrollable cravings and often binging, which makes you feel like shit, right? When you eat past the point of satiety, you feel bad. So like, listen, here's the pattern. You go on a diet, you restrict your food. You don't answer, like, you don't pick up the phone when when your body places the I'm hungry call. And then what happens is, in response to that felt sense of deprivation, in response to that caloric deprivation, your body is like, we gotta eat, we're freaking starving. Then you binge, then you eat until you're overfull, right? Then you're more likely to eat past the point of satiety, which is normal. It's like, if you're training the organism of your body to think that, if you're training it that it can't trust that food is going to be available when it wants to eat, your body is going to be like, okay, well, anytime food comes my way, I'm going to binge. I'm going to eat as much of it as I possibly can. Binging is a normal organism response to deprivation. Yeah? Then you binge and then you feel like shit. Like, it doesn't feel good to eat way past the point of satiety, right? It's totally normal. It's a part of the ups and downs of a human life that sometimes you're going to overeat, sometimes you eat too much, festival food, right? But that pattern where regularly depriving yourself and then eating so far past the point of satiety that you're actively uncomfortable, that is, that doesn't feel good, right? The whole point of IE is that you feel the signals of your body. Okay. So that's principle number 3, make peace with food. And again, what make peace with food mean is give yourself unconditional permission to eat. Think about that, my friends, the next time you sit down at the table and watch what happens. All right, principle number 4, challenge the food police. So what they mean by this is a reference to internal food policing and external. So external food policing looks like, again, I don't want to use the word crazy, but looks like batshit behavior that people do where they look into people's grocery carts. Like this is like, you have thin privilege when nobody has ever looked into your grocery cart and commented on your groceries. This is a common feature of just being a fat person alive on planet Earth and grocery shopping, is that fat people commonly report having people look into their grocery carts and comment on what's in their grocery carts. So that's an example of external food cop types of behavior, right? You might also in fact, like another example of external food policing that might happen is your kid gets weighed at school or something. Like apparently in certain parts of the country, there was this thing that was happening where they were evaluating children based on their BMI, and then they'd send a note home with the child if their BMI was quote unquote too high. BMI is a crock of shit, and it's a racist way of evaluating people's size and health. I'm not going to say much more about BMI here because that's a whole wormhole I could fall down. Yeah, okay. So challenge the food police. Also, there's internal food cops, right? So you might have an experience where you organize food in your life according to good and bad, where you assign the food in your life moral value. So principle number 4 is to challenge the food police internally and externally. No more good or bad foods. Principle number 5, discover the satisfaction factor. Did you know that food can be pleasurable? Right? If you have an ingrained pattern set up for decades of dieting, quite often you're completely divorced from the idea that food could be a pleasure, that food could be a source of satisfaction in your life, not in a guilty, shameful, I deprived myself and then I binged and I'm having this guilty, forbidden fruit, taboo experience of myself binging, but instead food can be just as pleasurable as feeling the sun, as simple and uncomplicated and pleasurable as feeling the sunlight on your face, or taking a big breath in, or having a big stretch, or taking a hot bath in the middle of the winter, right? Pleasure in eating is your birthright. Inability to enjoy your food is literally one of the ways that depression is diagnosed. Yeah. Evelyn Tribole says this: when you eat what you really want in an environment that is inviting, the pleasure you derive will be a powerful force in helping you feel satisfied and content. Let me tell you, I grew up on a farm. It was a sheep farm. I've lived with them my whole life and I love them. Think about when you feed an animal, how much pleasure they take in that, right? I'm just picturing the sheep on my dad's farm munching away, right? They love it. You deserve that too. That's part of your birthright. So that's principle 5, is discovering the satisfaction factor. Principle 6, feel your fullness. When you can trust that you'll give yourself the foods you desire, you'll be able to hear the body signals that tell you you're no longer hungry. You'll feel that you're comfortably full. Evelyn Tribole gives the example of this woman, Jackie. She says it was easier for Jackie to honor her body's satiety signals. Satiety is a word that means fullness, right? When she truly knows she could eat again if hungry, even within the hour, and eat her favorite foods. So a big part of IE is using your interoceptive superpower to feel your fullness, to feel when you're full. Okay, principle 7, cope with your emotions with kindness. Food restriction, both physically and mentally, can in and of itself trigger loss of control, which can feel like emotional eating. Find ways to comfort, nurture, and resolve your issues. Increased gratifying eating experiences allow people to let go of using food as a coping mechanism. So, emotional eating is an idea that in my opinion, it doesn't actually exist. People emotionally eat for um, all of our lives, right? When a baby is crying, mom gives a bottle, yeah? But I think the problem is when the only way that you have to deal with your emotional life is eating. That's the only coping mechanism that you have. That's problematic, right? You need to have more than one. And so my suggestion is that instead of being like, oh, I'm eating emotionally, I need to stop that. Why don't you look around and evaluate, take inventory of the other coping mechanisms that you have, and add more. Instead of being like, I need to take away my over reliance on coping with food, instead, my suggestion is that you add more coping mechanisms in and see what happens. Principle number 8: respect your body. Accept your genetic blueprint, right? The metaphor that Tribole uses is she talks about shoe size. Like you never try to squeeze a size 8 foot into a size 5 shoe. Excuse me. Respect your body so you can feel better about who you are. Think about everything your body has done for you, right? All bodies deserve dignity. Principle number 9: movement. Feel the difference is principle number 9. Forget militant exercise. Just get active and feel the difference, right? This is where focusing on movement trumps exercise. It just feels good to move more. And once you begin feeding yourself, once you begin actually responding to your body's hunger signals, you might actually find movement more appealing. Okay, that's principle number 9. Principle 10, 10 out of 10. Okay, honor your health with gentle nutrition. Gentle nutrition. Remember that you don't have to eat perfectly to be healthy. Make food choices that honor your taste buds while also honoring your health and making you feel good. So, one of the things that I have discovered is that, well, one thing is that I love vegetables. I love eating salads. They taste good to me. Like a really good salad to me is an incredible treat. Um, and it doesn't feel that great when I'm eating a lot of sweets, right? That's the thing is after literally years of working on this practice, because of this principle, honoring my health with gentle nutrition, I'm no longer in this black and white thing where it's like, I don't eat gluten or I don't eat sugar. Instead, it's like, I eat it when I want it, but I don't crave it because I eat it when I want it. And then the thing that happens is when you know that you can have sugar or gluten, well, like it's different if you have an actual health problem, right? One of my best friends has celiac and she cannot eat gluten under any circumstances. But if that's not you, yeah, if you know that you can have a formerly forbidden food any freaking time that you want it, it's no longer so charged. And then you can actually make choices based on what feels good. So generally in the morning, I have a some kind of a like a whole grain bagel or toast for breakfast, right? If I swap that with white bread, which I tried for a long time because I love the taste of white bread, I found that I was falling asleep. Yeah. So I made the choice based on gentle nutrition. It's not black and white, but on gentle nutrition. Most of the time, if I have a full workday ahead of me, I'm not going to choose to eat the white bread because it makes my blood sugar crash. That's just for me. Please don't take the thing that I'm saying here now and twist it into Emma says we shouldn't eat white bread. I'm not saying that shit. I'm just saying that when I moved through the refeeding phase of intuitive eating and got to this principle, when I arrived at this principle, I was able to start making choices really based on, really and honestly and truly based on what I felt, not based on some external advice from a book or what have you about about how I should eat. Yeah. Um, because listen, I will say this: using nutrition information in a militant way can still induce binging. Yeah. All right. So, my God, it's been an hour or so. You've been thank you so much for watching and listening. Um, as you can tell, I have so much to say about this. I feel super passionately about this topic. And I hope that it's also clear that this topic is really pretty complex. Like, it's weird because um, on the one hand, eating this practice of IE is kind of back to basics. It's kind of like just eat, right? But it also is intertwined with these enormous other forces that are present in our culture, right? Like I talked a little bit about how politics comes into play and emotions come into play when we talk about food. And I know that some of you have um, decades of dieting behind you, or if not dieting, other types of relating to food, other ways of relating to food that is not necessarily healthy, that is not necessarily serving you. So this is the last thing that I want to say to you about this. Intuitive eating is a practice that saved my relationship with food. Like, I'm so grateful that these women wrote this freaking book and thought this up, because food is so personal and so intimate. It's one of the key ways that we interact with the world we live in. And it's one of the key ways that we interact with the people that we love. And it is such a key and important way for us to take care of ourselves, right? Is to allow ourselves to freaking eat. So I love this practice. I'm fascinated by it. I use it. I'm on a journey with it. It's a journey that is evolving all the time. I love to talk about it. But I will tell you frankly that as a coach, in a certain way, I'm not actually that interested in IE as a coach, except in this one very particular way. As a coach, like, there are people who have dedicated their practices to talking about IE. They have podcasts about IE, or they're eating coaches, and I'm definitely happy to work with people who want help with that. I don't at this point in my coaching practice, early days yet. I don't necessarily feel like intuitive eating is going to be the sole focus of my practice, but I'm talking about it here in this group. And I want my coaching clients to know about it, the ones who are open to it, because diet culture fucking costs you. It costs you time. It costs you emotional strength. It costs you your self-respect. And it doesn't give you anything in return, is the horrible thing. Women in particular spend so much fucking time worrying about this and thinking about this. If you've been a dieter your whole life, or even for me, like, I didn't diet, right? But I did paleo for all those years and sugar detox for all those years. When I think of all the time I spent entering my macros into a calorie calculator for the brief time that I dieted, researching paleo recipes, trying to figure out substitutions, going to family gatherings and worrying about whether there was going to be anything there that I could eat. All of those things take a toll on your mental and physical strength. They take a toll on the amount of energy and brain power that you have to deal with other shit in your life, and not just in your life, to deal with other shit in this world. I saw a meme recently that was savage, but I thought spoke to this truth in a really serious way. And there's some issues with this meme, I'm going to say it. The meme was something like, it was a tweet, I think, and sorry, I forget who said it, but it was something like, imagine if white ladies spent as much time pushing back against racism as they spent on dieting, right? And there's some issues with that tweet, of course, like it kind of implies that people of color do not experience the negative effects of diet culture, which is not necessarily true, which is not true for each person, blah blah blah. But the truth in that tweet is that the time that we are spending doing a thing that fails 95 fucking percent of the time that we are spent chasing that dragon, the energy that we are spending chasing that dragon could be spent pushing back against these big oppressive forces that are I want to yell this, that are ruining lives so much more than obesity is, than being fat is, right? Um, whew, like fat phobia literally kills people. Racism kills people. It shortens lives. Sexism kills people. Ableism kills people. It ruins lives. It shrinks lives in the sense that like it makes your environment smaller. It shrinks your choices. Yeah, so this is, again, thank you so much for listening to all this. I'm so appreciative. Please ask any questions that you want in the comments. Now I have to go do something else, but I will respond to them over the coming days. And yeah, my closing words to you, fuck diet culture. Fuck diet culture. That's what I have to say about it. Mwah, mwah. Have a wonderful day. Down with diet culture. Up with us.